So right now it's January 2017, and you know what that means. Yeah, you do. It's the 20th anniversary of the Star Wars Special Edition. Yeah, the 20th anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the original Star Wars. In 1997, for those who don't know, George Lucas re-released the original Star Wars trilogy for its 20th anniversary. But this wasn't just releasing the movies in theaters to see them on the big screen. Yeah, they were releasing it with all kinds of added scenes and digital effects and everything. It was a trip. I mean, just being able to see these films for the first time as they were meant to be seen was awesome. But to get all these new things like the scene with Jabba the Hutt and Han Solo and enhancements to the battle sequences, all three films subsequently throughout January, February, and March got updated scenes, and I was able to see the original trilogy in theaters. And this is the 20th anniversary of that. So to celebrate that, I'm going to talk about the entire spectrum of Star Wars, mainly the films, going all the way from Star Wars A New Hope to the latest Rogue One, which is something that I haven't gotten a chance to really talk about yet. Now, I know I've covered the Star Wars films in depth through retrospectives, in-depth video reviews, even podcasts. So I don't really know if there's a lot more for me to add, but there might be a few things. Now, the first three films, it goes without saying, became instant classics, instantly supercharging our imaginations and showing us films that really haven't come before or since. Sure, today there's all kinds of science fiction films with all kinds of CGI special effects, alien creatures, different planets, all kinds of things, but most of those never really seem to stick. Actually, in the last couple of years, the really successful science fiction films have been more based on realistic scenarios, like Gravity, Interstellar, and of course 2015's The Martian, which, by the way, if you're a science fiction fan, you definitely need to check those out. Like everyone else, I remember seeing Star Wars at a fairly young age, but like a lot of classic movies, I was probably introduced to Star Wars before I even saw the films. I remember my first introduction to Star Wars was actually, they used to have these little storybook full photo storybooks that came with these little 45 records. They were kind of like books on tape today, but they were more for kids. They were complete with sound effects, music, and dialogue right from the film. So if you hadn't seen the movies and you saw these books first, they really forced you to use your imagination until you actually saw the film. One of the cartoons that I saw a lot as a kid was also the Muppet Babies, and if you remember the introduction of that show, they paid a lot of homage to Star Wars. So again, like classic monster movies like Frankenstein, there's already enough of it floating around to really know what Star Wars was before even seeing the film, so by the time I saw the movies for the first time, it already seemed a little familiar. Now, one thing that always interested me about Star Wars was they always started with episodes 4, 5, and 6. Remember, this was before the prequels, so that's one of the reasons why we always assumed that, inevitably George Lucas would someday come out with the first three. But why start with episodes 4, 5, and 6? Well, originally George Lucas wanted to call the first film Episode 4 A New Hope before it came out, and obviously because there were no other Star Wars films, the studios really didn't want him to release it that way, so when it came out in 1977, the film was just called Star Wars. But the film, since I've seen it as a kid, has always been called Episode 4 A New Hope. Even before the prequels came out, the really die-hard Star Wars fans did refer to the first film as A New Hope. And it was always A New Hope. I mean, I have the VHS copy right here to prove it. My friend and I always like to have this debate about, oh, it's not called Episode 4 A New Hope, it's just Star Wars. To me, it's always Star Wars. That's how him and a lot of other people view it. They refuse to call it Episode 4 A New Hope. Star Wars is so big that the fans will debate any little thing, even if it's not really worth debating. So my take on it is, it was always called Episode 4 A New Hope, as that's how I've always known it, even before the special editions, but call it whatever you want. Call it Star Wars, call it A New Hope. It is what it is. It's the same movie. Now, as much as I love these films, they're not always perfect. It seems with classic movies, people are a little hard-pressed to talk about anything negative about classic films because they are heralded as basically perfect. But the original Star Wars, honestly, I had kind of a hard time sitting through it when I was a kid because the first 40 minutes is kind of slow. If you really look at that first movie, the only human character we're introduced to at first is Princess Leia. We start off with that great shot of the Star Destroyer flying overhead, and then we've got that fight with the rebels and the stormtroopers, and then Darth Vader enters, and he's just this big hulking guy in black, and then we get a brief shot of Princess Leia, we get a brief introduction, and then we're kind of handed off to the droids, 3PO and R2-D2, and then the next maybe 15-20 minutes follows the droids and the Jawas. So George Lucas must have had he took a lot of risk and he had a lot of faith in his film to be able to start the story that way, because that's really unconventional when you think about it. The first real human character we meet aside from Leia is Luke, and that's about 15 minutes into the film, 15 or 20 minutes. So that first 20 minutes was kind of slow, until we finally meet Obi-Wan Kenobi and we go to Mos Eisley, and then from there the film just takes off and it never stops. From there it's basically a roller coaster ride. Then you've also got Luke's constant whining and Princess Leia's inconsistent British accent that everybody likes to pick on her for, but those are minor things, and it adds to the film's charm. The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, those are the ones that the fans seem to like the most usually, and honestly those are near perfect films. I'm really hard pressed to find flaws with them. Although I do like Irvin Kershner's directing style in Empire better, Return of the Jedi is my personal favorite film in the whole trilogy. The visual effects, the storytelling, it is a little more repetitive. It's basically a redo of A New Hope. It's, they go after a second Death Star, which is kind of silly. And it has the Ewoks, I know, but I can't really find a lot of fault with them. I really do like the Ewoks. But I do think that if Return of the Jedi was released today, the same exact way it was released in '83, people would still accept it, and it would still be just a sight to behold, as Rogue One proved. Now, of course, we're here to talk about the 20th anniversary of the special editions. And of course, no Star Wars discussion is complete without talking about the special editions. So in 1997, as I said before, the Star Wars trilogy was released to theaters with brand new special effects. A lot of things were enhanced, worlds were opened up more. For example, Mos Eisley Spaceport, was opened up a little bit more. Cloud City was opened up more. We got to see more planets at the end of Return of the Jedi, rejoicing at the fall of the Empire. That was all cool. And in '97, there were really two purposes for doing that. One was to basically finish George Lucas's original vision, because before that point, he saw the Star Wars trilogy as unfinished. The second reason really was he was in the middle of directing The Phantom Menace, the first of the prequels, and he was trying to test out to see how the CGI visual effects would test out with audiences, and kind of prepping to see how far he could stretch the technology. Of course, since the special editions, every home video release has gone in and made new changes. Starting with the 2004 DVD release, the purpose of the changes there was to tie in the prequel trilogy with the original trilogy, which is why you have Ian McDiarmid replacing the actor of the Emperor in The Empire Strikes Back, and why Hayden Christensen now appears as a Force ghost at the end of Return of the Jedi. I understand the logic behind these changes. I never really cared for them that much, because in '97, when they were adding in the special effects, it was to make the movies look a little more polished, and I never minded that. For the most part, I thought that was fine. The end battle of Yavin especially benefited from these effects at the end of A New Hope. With the changes to the 2004 DVD release, I just kind of find them unnecessary, and they do kind of pull me out of the film a little more. They're a little more distracting. Then there's, of course, the Blu-ray release, which I believe came out in 2012, and there were a few more changes made. Not as big. The Ewoks can blink their eyes now, which is cool, I guess. But the one change to me that is really cringeworthy is at the end of Return of the Jedi, hearing Darth Vader yell, "No." Not just once, but twice. And it's in the end of my favorite Star Wars movie. The one thing that everyone cringes about in Revenge of the Sith was at the end when Darth Vader yells that line. And I kind of think George Lucas maybe put that in there on purpose to anger his fans. I don't know. The rest of Return of the Jedi is still great. That one change, though, really makes me want to pull my hair. One last thing I'll touch on with the whole Star Wars special edition thing is the original unaltered trilogy. Will we ever get it released on home video? Should they release it again for curiosity's sakes? Even people who like the special editions and defend them, they do feel kind of cheated that they aren't given the option to see a definitive like Blu-ray release of the unaltered trilogy. My thoughts are, it'd be nice to have. I'm not going to lose sleep over it like everyone else does. It's a curious piece of history, but like I said, I have multiple copies of my VHS tapes, and if I ever want to see the unaltered trilogy, I'll see them. I thought that most of the changes made to the special editions were fine and actually improved the film. Like I said, I love the Battle of Yavin, and I know I'm in the minority on this one here, but I really do like the enhanced dance sequence in Return of the Jedi. I mean, if you watch that original sequence, you can literally see the strings moving, the strings on the puppets moving. That hasn't aged very well, and I really like just the updated jazz music that they use in the updated special edition version. That's just my preference. I like the fact that it's put there out of kind of a whimsical need to have this weird dance scene. And if you look at the original scene, it's not even really a dance number. It's just kind of a small thing in passing that we see, but now it's this big dance number, and I kind of like that change a lot. So I always have since I was a kid. I don't know, maybe it's the nostalgia talking. Tune in next week and we're going to talk about the inevitable prequels, because I know everybody just loves to talk about the prequels when it comes to Star Wars.